Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet, except for the sound of my own breath echoing in my ears. I hadn't expected the sudden nearness, the way he closed the distance between us in a single step, until my back pressed against the smooth wooden surface of the wardrobe. The space seemed to shrink, charged with a tension that neither of us named. His eyes locked onto mine, steady, unwavering, and full of something that made my pulse stumble. The air between us was warm, thick with a silence that said more than words ever could. I could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that every inhale I took seemed to draw him into me. When his hand rose, slow and deliberate, brushing against my collar as though asking a question without speaking it, I froze, not from fear, but from anticipation. His fingers traced the edge of my shirt, then slipped deftly to the first button. A simple motion, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid thoughts. With each button undone, the distance between us narrowed, as though he wasn't just unfastening fabric but unraveling every defense I had carefully built. My chest rose and fell with uneven rhythm, betraying me. He noticed, of course, he noticed. His lips curved in the faintest smile, one that wasn't playful but knowing, as though he had already read the secret I was trying to hide. I could feel the wooden panels cool against my back, contrasting with the warmth of his nearness. The world beyond the wardrobe, beyond the quiet hum of the house, no longer existed. All that mattered was the way he leaned in, his breath mingling with mine, the gravity that drew me closer to him without a single word spoken. Every glance, every brush of his fingers, carried meaning, layers of history, trust, desire, and the fragile thrill of surrender. My voice was caught somewhere in my throat, and though no words escaped, the silence between us was louder than anything I'd ever heard. And then, with my shirt hanging loose, my heart pounding in my chest, he tilted his head slightly closer, as though about to speak, or perhaps to do something far more daring. But before it happened, the moment suspended in time, leaving me breathless, wondering, what would he do next? The silence stretched, heavy and intoxicating. My pulse thudded in my ears, each beat louder than the last. He hadn't moved away. If anything, he was closer now, close enough that I could feel the faint brush of his breath against my cheek. My fingers, uncertain and restless, hovered in the space between us, aching to touch but held back by hesitation. Then it happened, barely a touch, accidental, fleeting. His hand grazed mine as he shifted, but the spark it sent through me was undeniable. I caught my breath, sharp and unsteady, and his eyes flicked down at the sound, then back up, catching mine like he was holding me in place. The wardrobe at my back felt like an anchor, keeping me from floating away in the storm that was building between us. Every movement seemed amplified, the subtle turn of his wrist, the way his shoulders squared as though he was fighting the same pull I felt, the slight tilt of his head that brought him a fraction closer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The word came out softer than a whisper, almost trembling, but I didn't finish it. I couldn't. Not with him watching me like that, like he already knew what I wanted to say. His answer wasn't words. Instead, his hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, but the nearness of it left me breathless. His fingertips lingered just a moment too long at the edge of my jaw, and my knees weakened at the heat of the touch. I dared a glance at his lips, just for a second, and instantly regretted it. Or maybe I didn't. Because when I looked back up, I caught him doing the same, his gaze dipping lower before returning to mine with a fire that made my chest tighten. The air between us grew heavier, more urgent. I could feel myself leaning forward without meaning to, as though gravity itself had shifted. My shirt hung loose, my breath uneven, my thoughts tangled in a web I couldn't escape. Something was coming, something inevitable. We were teetering at the edge of a line we both knew was there, and yet neither of us seemed ready to stop. Not yet. The space between us had vanished to almost nothing, and yet it felt like too much. Every shallow breath I took was met with his, mingling in the air, quickening, pulling us both into a rhythm we hadn't agreed upon but couldn't escape. My back pressed harder into the wardrobe as though the solid wood might steady me, though it did little to calm the storm in my chest. His hand hovered near my shoulder, fingers twitching slightly, as though he wasn't sure whether to pull back or let them fall where instinct wanted. I could see the conflict in his eyes, restraint and fire colliding in a war he was barely holding together. And the way he looked at me, as if I was the only thing anchoring him in the moment, made me tremble. A whisper slipped past his lips, not even words, more like the sound of something unsaid, and it brushed against my ear like a secret. My skin prickled, heat rising, my breath hitching so sharply I was certain he heard it. I didn't dare move, because if I did, the thread holding us back might snap. The angle of his body boxed me in, his presence overwhelming yet intoxicating. My hands, tense at my sides, itched to reach out, to close the distance in a way that would tip us both over the edge. But I didn't. Not yet. He leaned in closer, his chest nearly touching mine, the faint warmth of it stirring every nerve awake. My gaze fell to the hollow of his throat, then lifted back to his mouth before I could stop myself. That mistake, if it was one, didn't go unnoticed. His lips curved faintly, not in amusement but in acknowledgement, a wordless promise that he knew exactly what I was thinking. The air grew unbearable, heavy with everything we weren't saying, everything we were holding back. I could feel the moment tilting, teetering like a glass on the edge of a table, waiting for the slightest push to send it crashing into inevitability. And just as his hand finally descended, brushing the curve of my arm with maddening slowness, I knew it wouldn't take much more before resistance crumbled. The line was right there. We both felt it. And neither of us could pretend it wasn't about to be crossed. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves had closed in around us to witness the gravity pulling us closer. Every breath came quicker now, shallow and sharp, each inhale catching on the heat that pulsed between us. His nearness was overwhelming, his scent, his warmth, the steady rise and fall of his chest so close to mine that I could almost feel the rhythm against my skin. My back pressed firmly into the wardrobe, no escape left, not that I wanted one. His arm braced beside me, a subtle cage, and though he hadn't touched me fully, the implication was enough to make my pulse stumble. His other hand lingered at my sleeve, fingertips grazing the fabric like he was testing the limits of how much control he still possessed. I dared to meet his eyes. What I saw there made my breath falter. No hesitation. No retreat. Just raw intensity, sharpened by restraint, and the promise of something neither of us could take back. My lips parted, not to speak, but because words no longer belonged here. Then he moved, slow, deliberate, closing the already small distance until his breath traced the curve of my cheek. His mouth hovered just beside mine, not touching, but close enough that the air grew electric. The tension was unbearable, every nerve in my body straining toward that final spark. I shifted without thinking, my shoulder brushing against his chest. The contact was small, accidental, but it was enough to draw a sound from him, a low exhale, heavier than a sigh, laced with restraint snapping at the edges. My heartbeat thundered in response, my fingers curling against the wardrobe as if to keep myself grounded. His hand finally settled at my waist, not forceful, but firm enough to steal my breath. The warmth of it radiated through me, anchoring and unsteadying all at once. My body leaned forward instinctively, as though my control had slipped beyond recall. Every second stretched impossibly long, every movement magnified into something dangerous, something inevitable. His lips hovered closer, his hand tightened slightly, and my breath hitched in answer. We were balanced on the razor's edge, one heartbeat away from surrender. And then, just before the final line could be crossed, the world seemed to hold its breath with us. The moment teetered, fragile and fiery, every heartbeat echoing like a drum against the silence of the room. His lips hovered just a whisper from mine, his hand tightening at my waist, and I felt the inevitability of it, the crash we both knew was coming. And then, a sound. Sharp, sudden. A knock at the door. It sliced through the air like a blade, shocking me back into the present. My body went rigid, breath caught in my throat. His grip at my waist didn't loosen, in fact, it grew firmer, as though he refused to let the world intrude. His eyes darkened, flicking toward the sound, then back to mine with a look that made my pulse race even faster. "Don't," he whispered, barely audible, his breath brushing my lips. The word wasn't a command, not fully, it was more like a plea. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a voice muffled through the door. Familiar. Too familiar. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't move. He was still there, too close, holding me in a cage of heat and want that refused to let me retreat. We were trapped. Trapped not by the wardrobe at my back or the door at our side, but by the weight of what we had already started. My body screamed to push him away, to step aside, to compose myself before that door opened, but my heart, my breath, every pulse beneath my skin begged for the opposite. His forehead lowered to mine, a dangerous intimacy that made my knees buckle. "Ignore it," he murmured, his voice rough with restraint unraveling. But how could I? Whoever was outside would hear, would know. The thought sent a rush of fear through me, but with it came something else. Something darker. The thrill of nearly being caught, of secrets balancing on the edge of discovery. It wrapped itself around the moment, twisting the heat into something more daring, more dangerous than before. The knocking stopped. Silence. Yet that silence wasn't relief, it was heavier, more suffocating than the sound itself. Whoever it was had lingered, waiting. Listening. My chest rose and fell unevenly, my shirt loose, my skin hot under his hand that refused to let go. I looked at him, my panic clear, but his expression only deepened. His lips brushed so close that the words nearly touched me as he said, "Now you understand, there's no turning back." The weight of it hit me like fire. We were past the point of safety, past the comfort of stolen glances and subtle touches. This was something else now, something we couldn't undo, even if we wanted to. The danger wasn't outside that door anymore. It was here. Between us. The silence after the knock stretched endlessly, a silence so thick I could hear the hammering of my own pulse. His hand gripped my waist tighter, anchoring me as though he feared I might slip away. Our breaths tangled, uneven, desperate, and then all at once the tension snapped. I didn't think. I couldn't. My body moved before reason could intervene, leaning forward into him, and in that instant, all the restraint we had clung to shattered. His lips finally found mine, rough, unrelenting, a clash of everything we had fought to resist. The wardrobe pressed into my back, his weight against me, and the room itself seemed to tremble with the force of what had been unleashed. Every movement sharpened. His hand slid higher, fingers spreading against the curve of my back, pulling me impossibly closer. My breath hitched, my pulse wild, and yet I couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. The storm we had held at bay had broken, and the flood consumed us both. But then, the door burst open. The sound cracked through the moment like thunder. I froze, lips parted, his body still pressed against mine. My eyes darted to the doorway, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't just anyone. It was her. Her silhouette filled the frame, familiar and devastating. Eyes wide, mouth parted in shock, she stood frozen, a witness to everything we had tried to keep hidden. The world tilted violently, and suddenly the air that had moments ago been thick with fire turned suffocating, heavy with something darker, exposure. He didn't move. Not right away. His body stayed pressed against mine, his eyes locked on hers with a defiance that chilled me as much as it thrilled me. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted, his hand still resting firmly at my waist. "Now," he said, voice low, meant for both of us, "there are no more secrets." The word struck me harder than the interruption itself. No retreat. No denial. What we had unleashed wasn't just passion, it was consequence. And as her expression hardened, shifting from shock to something sharper, I realized this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new, more dangerous fire. The room hung in silence, so charged it felt like the air itself might shatter. She stood in the doorway, still as stone, her eyes locked on us. My chest rose and fell in frantic waves, caught between guilt, fear, and the embers of desire that refused to die. His hand never left me. Even with her there, even with everything unraveling, his grip at my waist held firm, his presence steady. The message was clear, he wasn't hiding anymore. At last, she spoke. So it's true. Her voice trembled at the edges, but the core of it was sharp, a blade cutting straight through the moment. I couldn't answer. My throat was too dry, my thoughts too tangled. But he did. Calmly. Boldly. It's always been true. You just didn't want to see it. The words struck her harder than the sight of us together. Her expression shifted, shock dissolving into fury, hurt mixing with disbelief. I expected her to storm out, to scream, to break the fragile stillness into chaos. Instead, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. That sound was more terrifying than any outburst. My body trembled, not just from the tension but from the raw pull of everything happening at once. We were suspended in a triangle of fire, him, me, and her, none of us backing down. She looked at me then, not at him, and her gaze burned hotter than his touch. For a heartbeat, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she smiled, slow, deliberate, unsettling. If this is how it is, she whispered, then let's see how far you're both willing to go. The challenge in her words sent a shiver through me, equal parts fear and thrill. The atmosphere twisted, no longer just about forbidden desire but something more daring, more dangerous. I realized then that the fire wasn't dying. It was spreading. And as his hand tightened at my waist, as her eyes lingered like a second flame, I knew the story wasn't ending. It was only igniting into something none of us could control.